In this video, we're going to take an updated look at the Conform Retopo Mesh feature in 3D Code's Sculpt Workspace. It only works with three major tools, and that is Pose, Move, and Transform. The reason for this is it causes a bit of a performance hit whenever you're trying to perform an operation because it's doing simultaneous calculations. That's why it's limited to these three tools. When you make these large-scale edits to your sculpt, it can lead to a lot of extra work trying to make your Retopo Mesh conform to those specific changes. That's why 3D Code is going to try to do this all in the same step. While I'm at it though, I do want to mention how you can tweak or finesse your Retopo Mesh whenever you're using brushes or you're making any other kind of modifications. These are typically much smaller in scope, and thus it's much easier to go back periodically and adjust those local areas where you made those sculpting edits. So there are two major use cases here that involve using this feature. One is if you have created a character from scratch, you've gone through the process of retopologizing, and for whatever reason, if you have to go back and make some changes to your model. The other major use case is whenever you import a low polygon model into 3D Code for the purpose of sculpting. If you import your model into the Retopo Workspace first, you can go into the Sculpt Workspace, click on the Import tool. At the very bottom of the Tool Options panel, you'll see a button for Pick from Retopo. What this will do is bring a copy of what you have in the Retopo room directly into this workspace so that you have two different versions. You're going to be working on a high resolution version, and then you'll have your low resolution version in the Retopo room. In either case, again, this Conform Retopo Mesh will save you a lot of work with large scale changes. So let's go ahead and get started now. I just want to work in the head region here so I can hide everything else by alt-clicking the visibility icon of the layer that I want to work on. And that would be this body layer here. So alt-click, and then I can zoom in. The next thing I want to do is make sure that just the Retopo Mesh I'm going to be working with is visible. So I'll hide all these other parts. And if you have multiple UV maps, you probably want to switch to the one that you're working on as well. Okay. Now, the new addition here recently is the ability to see your Retopo Mesh as you're making these edits to it. So let's do that. Let's click on the Pose tool. And again, I don't see anything, but if I check Conform Retopo Mesh, now all of a sudden I can see it. If you're using a Pose tool, you're going to need to make some type of a selection. While you do that, you may notice a little bit of a performance drag as you make a paint selection or use another one of these selection types. So let's temporarily uncheck Conform Retopo Mesh. It also gets the mesh out of your way so you can see more clearly what you're actually selecting. So let's choose Sphere. We could use Paint Select and just brush select the area, but the sphere works pretty well for a situation like this where I'm just wanting to scale the nose in just a bit. I probably want to hit my S key to turn symmetry on and show symmetry plane if I want. In this case, I'm going to turn the visibility of the plane off. Symmetry is still active, but that plane is no longer obscuring my view. So let's go ahead and check our selection opacity. If we want a faint amount, we can reduce our selection opacity numerically here. I'll just bring it all the way up to 100%. May just fall off a bit. And we want to use one of these brush draw modes in the E panel. So yeah, let's go ahead and click our first point and just drag to our last point. And 3D Code is going to create a gradient between these 2 points. So that's okay. I could probably stand to adjust it a little bit here along the lips. So let's switch to Paint Select. And I'm also going to hide the gizmo while I'm working. And let's hold down the Control key and just brush along the lips to remove that part of the selection. And let's click smooth selection a few times. And I like to switch to the absolute draw mode because it's kind of a no-nonsense brush draw mode. It's not having to take into account radius or depth levels. So let's hold down the shift key because that allows us to smooth. And I may brush a little bit here and then hold down the shift key again to smooth that area. Alright, so now we're ready to make our deformation. Before I do that, I need to go ahead and check Conform Retopo Mesh. Now let's unhide our gizmo. I probably want to reorient it here, so let's try to center mass, main axis. And main axis tries to orient along the average of the normals. In this case, I'll have to adjust it. So to move only gizmo, you would check here or hold down the shift key to adjust it on the fly. This will also allow me to move the pivot point or the action center. Hold down the shift key, I'll just move it back a little bit. Okay, so now let's go to the center of the gizmo where we can scale globally. Okay, and we'll scale in along the x-axis. And I'll hold down the shift key and move that out to the tip of the nose. Hold down the shift key, move it back. Again, we'll just continue scaling it along the x-axis. We could also use the freeform lattice, but in this instance, just using a regular transform gizmo should suffice. Okay, so we're done. I can hide the gizmo and clear the selection. Let's uncheck Conform Retopo Mesh and inspect the result. We've got a little bit of cleanup here, I think, on the outer edge of the nose, and we want to nudge the front part of the nose just a bit with the Move tool to kind of clean things up. Before I do again, I want to check Conform Retopo Mesh. With the Move tool, there are two ways that we can determine what direction it's getting moved. One is by default to move in screen space. The other way is to hold down the control key and 3D Coat will move the vertices along the vertex normals. So I'm just going to use the default method here. It was probably a little bit too abrupt. I'm going to change it to a softer brush alpha. Control key, pull it out. Increase your brush size, and I'm just going to nudge the nose in a bit. It looks like it's off somewhat. There are times where you may want to use a standard brush or just smooth an area and then go back to the retopo room and tweak the retopo mesh. So let's do that. All I need to do to finesse this area to make it re-snap is to simply use something like the brush tool and smooth and have 3D Coat snap with auto snap turned on. I can right click and drag all the way up if I want a very strong smoothing effect on my retopo mesh. In this case I don't. I want it to be somewhat subtle. Or if you want to snap only, then you could right click and drag all the way down till you have no smoothing effect. So as I'm holding down the shift key, I can just tap that area and it snapped the vertices that were under my brush. Okay, so obviously I probably want to smooth it a little bit. So let's right click and drag up. There we go. Now, if you've done a lot of sculpting edits across your model, then you may want to snap the entire Retopo Mesh to your underlying voxel or surface mode object. In this case, we just want to make localized adjustments. If you snap the entire mesh, you may find from time to time, if there are some large-scale changes where you have vertices in close proximity to one another, you'll get snapping errors. That can happen around the corners of the lips, corners of the eyes, in between the fingers, and so on. So you want to be very careful. So yeah, let's go back to the sculpt room, and rather than using Conform Retopo Mesh, let's make some brush edits. Let's try soft polish. For this brush, I'm going to hold down the control key in order to trim away the excess. Let's go back to the move tool. We want to make one small change here toward the front. We'll turn Conform Retopo Mesh back on, and because of the edits, you can see how the Retopo Mesh is offset just by a little bit. So again, we can go back to the Retopo room, and with the brush tool, let's use another method here. Let's use a select tool with vertices, and let's just select these vertices right here. And with auto snap checked, we can hit relax. This particular technique does 2 in 1. It snaps and it relaxes at the same time, just like we did with the brush. So let's hit escape to drop that selection. We want to go back to the brush. Okay, so we can turn off Conform Retopo Mesh. Skip forward just a few moments while sculpting some additional tweaks here in the cheek area, and we're now ready to unhide everything and see our result. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the visibility icon, cycle between the different camera views that I've stored. And with that, we'll bring this video to a conclusion. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.